Welcome back to Live Now from Fox. I'm Stephanie Quinu. We were sharing with you a live event happening at the White House as President Trump participated in a Medal of Honor ceremony, but starting with remarks about Iran. And I did want to share this with you as President Trump now says the Iran operations will likely last 4 to 5 weeks, but also says that he's prepared, quote, to go far longer than that. We continue to follow all aspects of the developments out of the Middle East. And for more on that, I do want to bring in Tawfiq Rahim, who is a geopolitical expert and the author of Middle East in Crisis and Conflict. And Tawfiq, we appreciate you taking the time to join us here on Live Now from Fox.
Pleasure to be here.
So, Tawfiq, I wanted to start off with the very latest from President Trump. He has indicated that Operation Epic Fury could last between 4 to 5 weeks. That's just a little shorter from the first timeline that he had indicated of 5 weeks. As we take a look at the developments and also the retaliation from Iran, but also from offshoots like the terrorist organization Hezbollah, what does this new time frame indicate, if anything, to you?
Well, it definitely shows that this is not, let's say, the new era of President Trump. It's hearkening back to, let's say, the past eras of war. People were kind of getting accustomed to this quick operation, as it was the case in Venezuela, 2-3 days, a strike. This now seems to be a prolonged conflict, and every week that it continues means that it's actually much harder to wind down.
We're also seeing continued retaliation from Iran, but also from Hezbollah. This is a live look here from Beirut, Lebanon. And we've seen plumes of smoke. And in fact, right here, this is a live look in the distance on the left-hand side of your screen. It's nighttime, a little hard to tell, but we continue to see some of these plumes of smoke. You know, what does this indicate as we see Iran continuing to retaliate and its proxies, at least Hezbollah, doing the same?
Well, I worked in Lebanon many years ago, and, this type of skirmish between Lebanon and remnants inside Lebanon of different militant groups, in this case, Hezbollah and Israel, goes back decades. So that is not new. What could be new is that the central government has said that they will join efforts to crack down on Hezbollah in parts of the country, which could engulf the country into civil strife. So that's very concerning. And this is obviously a new front. So having this front very active at the same time as Iran becomes a challenge for Israel. And for the United States, perhaps a third front with Yemen could be added if the Houthis get involved. So this just indicates this widening, theater of the conflict.
And let's talk about this region of the world. We see now a vacuum of power in Iran. The foreign minister now indicating that they're going to be selecting a new supreme leader in the next day or so. But as we take a look at the issue of stability and security, what can you share with us about the ripple effects of what the killing of Iran's supreme leader and its top 40 leaders might do?
Well, this has huge ramifications. I mean, we have the immediate area of Iran and its environs in the Gulf, but then you extend the Middle East. The Middle East goes all the way to the Mediterranean Sea. And all the way towards the border with Afghanistan and Pakistan. And so we saw that on Friday, there was that conflagration that was occurring. And then there's also other Muslim countries that are, getting into play. Like in Nigeria, you had protests in some of the Shia communities. So the ripple effects are quite kind of considerable. There's some noise in the background here.
And not a problem. And I also want to talk about the makeup of Iran itself. There are a lot of different factions and communities within Iran as we take a look at the larger landscape of the civilian population. And we've been hearing from President Trump urging and encouraging the Iranian civilian population to rise up and seize this moment for a new regime. But as we take a look at the makeup, is that realistic?
You know what? There is obviously a contingent of Iranians and a strong contingent that's happy with the assassination of Ayatollah Khamenei. But Iran itself is divided. Also, the populations are nervous. They've been there before where they've risen up and there's been a crackdown. And it's not clear that the regime is departing from the scene. So, for Iranians on the ground to be able to rise up, they need to see that there's actually going to be a displacement of the military force. And even for President Trump, he's indicated that it might not be a wholesale regime change operation. So we are more likely to see parts of the regime stay in place, and the population is probably not going to get as involved. What you might see is militant groups, for example, in the Baloch areas of Iran, Kurdish areas in the north, activated that are more paramilitary forces that could start opposing the government there.
And Tofik, I just wanted to share this with our viewers right here. This is from the White House, Rapid Response 47, quoting President Trump saying our objectives are clear. First, we're destroying Iran's missile capabilities. Second, we're annihilating their Navy. Third, we're ensuring that the world's #1 sponsor of terror can never obtain a nuclear weapon. And finally, we're ensuring that the Iranian regime cannot continue to arm, fund, and direct terrorist armies outside of your border. You were just sharing that maybe some parts of the regime may change while others may stay the same. As we're sharing the quote from President Trump right here, what do you extrapolate, if anything, from this statement?
Well, these are the same objectives that were in place last summer in July. They're the ones that Witkoff and Kushner took to Geneva and have posed to the Iranians. This is around enrichment, this is around the ballistic missile capabilities, and this is around the proxy forces in the region. And the Iranians have rebuffed very significant restrictions around these issues. And I don't see any change as of immediately. And some of the new leadership, one person, his name is Ali Larijani, who's head of the National Security Council, one of those bodies there. He's been tweeting and posting that he's not even ready for negotiations, or Iran is not ready for negotiations. They would prefer a long war. And so this is obviously the aims that President Trump has put forth, but there's no actually solution space as of yet. And that's what I think a lot of people are finding a challenge in terms of pushing towards an off-ramp.
How much, when you were talking about, one of those leaders saying that they would like a prolonged war, how much of that is based in reality and how much is that is political posturing? As I imagine a lot of the remaining and surviving individuals may not want to come across as being opposed to the former supreme leader.
Well, I think it's a matter of both. It's posturing for sure because they're trying to position themselves, and even if they do that externally, maybe there's some back channel messages that are saying something different. But you have to remember that the previous supreme leader was getting quite old. So the fact that he's removed from the scene means that there's new voices that might be even more aggressive than the supreme leader or might have a different vision. And this really becomes a battle of attrition, not of necessarily military soldiers, but of the supply of ammunition and weapons. And so for the Iranians, how fast can they create these drones that have very catastrophic effects but are relatively inexpensive? And how quickly can the interceptors in the Gulf countries be replenished? And they're being used at a very, very high rate, sometimes 5 interceptors for 1 missile or drone. And so while there hasn't been a huge amount of damage we've seen to, oil facilities, airports, if those interceptors are not there, there could be significant repercussions.
And Tofik, you're the author of Middle East in Crisis and Conflict. There's been a lot of historical conflict with the Middle East, and oftentimes as we look to the future, we have to look to the past and the pattern of events. What can you glean from previous conflicts and overturn of power in the Middle East, maybe even in specifically Iran, as we look ahead?
I mean, obviously, this goes back to 1979. You were talking about half a century. The book I wrote after Middle Eastern Crisis and Conflict Trump 2.5 primer, I went back and looked at all the interviews of President Trump going back 40 years. And in his very first extended interview, it was at the time of the Iran hostage crisis, and he spoke to it. So this is something that has lived in the psyche of not just the American population, not just the Middle East, but also for President Trump going back 4 decades. And I think this is like that final moment, this culmination since the Iranian Revolution of coming towards some type of resolution. And so if there is a resolution, it could be quite cataclysmic. But as you pointed out, that region is just very difficult. And finding a way to meet everybody's interest, it's very complicated. And the one thing that always is the constant is unintended consequences. And every day that continues from here on out, that's what we need to be watching out for.
As we take a look at the next steps and the ongoing operation with the United States and Israel, is there one critical part of it that you feel like could be the tipping point, whether it's success or not?
Yes, I think if there is a leader that from Iran that reaches out and says, I am ready to sit down, maybe not concede. If that person emerges, can show that they have weight inside the country, I think gives a counterpart to start a negotiation. I think the other thing to watch out for is if the Gulf countries, in a united way, alongside Turkey, come to Washington and say, we want an end to the war. If that pressure grows from within the American alliance, I think you'll see something coming to a conclusion pretty quickly.
And Tawfiq, before we let you go, is there anything else that you would like to share with our viewers?
Yes, I think we really have to keep an eye out on the hits on oil and gas infrastructure, the airports, and then one thing that people don't talk enough about is desalination plants. A lot of that region's water supply is based on desalination. We might not think of that as a first order concern, but that puts the entire population of the Gulf at risk if those are hit. And so one of those incidents could just have a catastrophic event for the region.
So is that what some of these countries that are allied with the United States concerned about? And, you know, one of our previous guests was talking about the potential for Iran to use cyber attacks to really infiltrate and disrupt infrastructure within the United States, but also within the countries of our allies as well. Is that something that is of great concern in the region?
I think they have tremendous cyber capabilities and they've deployed that, and I'm sure they're deploying it right now. But because a lot of their critical infrastructure has been hit, that may not be as possible as some of these mini physical hits that they're able to do. And if you look at what happened in Abu Dhabi, Amazon's data center went offline because they hit a power installation. So they're being very acute with where they hit. They don't need to do the cyber attack. They can go upstream, hit the power. There's not even any data. There's not any telecommunications going. And that's, you know, we're not used to that. We're so advanced in our warfare. We're going back to these mini drones that are hitting centralized infrastructure, and people are not prepared for that eventuality. In fact, they might have over-prepared for cybersecurity.
All right, Tawfiq Rahim, we appreciate you sharing your perspective and expertise with us here on Live Now from Fox.
Thank you, Stephanie.
All right, we're going to step away for a brief moment. We'll be right back.